So thanks to everybody for attending today's webinar. As I say, it's the first that we've run through Microsoft Teams, so let's see how it goes. We're now up to just under 100 in attendance, so that's great. Thank you all for joining. I won't go through the usual housekeeping. We've got 96 separate fire exits and toilets, so I don't think that'll be necessary. So on to today's presentation. We're delighted to be partnering up with Hayes Recruitment again, having run sessions with James, Laura and their team for a number of years now. I and my colleague Sam Pawson, fellow employment expert whose video is on, we'll be talking through furlough, other COVID-related developments, returning to the workplace and future restructuring. And just by the nature of what we're presenting on, I've changed the presentation twice just in the last 24 hours because of different pieces of news that are coming out. In between our presentations, we'll hand over to Laura Kemp, who is the Business Director at Hayes. Laura will explore the return to the office in more detail and how ongoing support can be provided as part of that return. Laura has some slides for her presentation, which I'll be moving on. So just like the daily press briefings, you might hear, next slide please, 12 times. So I'm going to start with where we're at now on the furlough scheme. I think probably every attendee will have had to have had some involvement with this scheme and this word that many of us didn't really know existed until late March 2020. The initial concern was that the scheme could only be used for employees who would otherwise have been made redundant. We've had 8 revisions of the guidance and 3 Treasury directions since that time, and I think we've all just about survived. The final content of the scheme was published in June, and then we had changes later to incorporate flexible furloughing. Safe to say it's been a lifeline for many employers and will continue to be so until October when the scheme ends. However, some figures that came out just this morning have confirmed that there's been a drop in payrolled employees of 650,000. So I think that just highlights the number of employers who are actually making plans and executing those plans for restructuring already. In terms of some stats, these were only released yesterday, so hot off the press. 3.14 million employers having made use of the scheme up to yesterday. 9.4 million jobs furloughed. That's an increase of 678,000 from May. So I think we've become aware that more employers have continued to struggle or have only just started their furloughing from the end of May, which is quite a surprise for me. Yorkshire and the Humber have had 711,000 jobs claimed for. 29.6% of all workers have been furloughed at some point. So in the Yorkshire and Humber region, that kind of sits about average really in terms of across the country. Certainly not been the hardest hit, but we've certainly not been immune from the impact of the pandemic. Interestingly, female employees less likely to be furloughed. This is likely to reflect sectors that men and women tend to work in. More women in education and health with less furloughing in those sectors. I'll just mute our latest attendee.
Say, Danny, you've got a dog on with you.
It's not myself. No. Okay. So, highest sectors for furloughing: accommodation and food services, construction, and quite bizarrely, trade unions. A number of our clients have actually had quite a bit of interaction with trade unions during the pandemic, and particularly in relation to consultation, which we have to undertake with unions on reopening the workplace. I'm actually very surprised that many union employees have been furloughed. And just looking at some general survey stats recently, 71% of employers are planning on a return to the office in a phased partial manner. So if you are looking at a staged return, that's likely to be the trend for some time going forwards. 55% of employees generally concerned about coming back, which I think is not surprising. 88% uncomfortable commuting on public transport. On the furlough scheme, you might be slightly concerned to note there has been the first arrest made in relation to fraud. On the 9th of July, a 57-year-old man from Solihull was arrested in connection with a £495,000 job retention scheme fraud. They seized computers and digital devices. I think this is probably an isolated case because he was also arrested on suspicion of a multi-million-pound tax fraud and money laundering offences. But nevertheless, it does show that HMRC are active. I think at the moment they will be more reactive. There is a helpline for employees to call if they feel that their employer has breached the furlough rules, most commonly by asking employees to continue to work. That will switch, I think, to a more proactive approach from October. So there will be auditing happening for the next few years, which employers will need to be wary of. And we talked throughout this presentation about the need to ensure that proper records are kept. We'll come on to that throughout this presentation. So what we're seeing now, so across our client base, I think we have about 300 retained clients now across the region and beyond. So we'll just give you some trends as to what we're experiencing at the moment. Some businesses have returned to pre-COVID levels or are exceeding previous performance. So typically health and social care, a number of internet retailers, bicycle and exercise equipment retailers. Construction does seem to be accelerating in terms of getting back to normal. I think new house building especially is, they tended to return to work very, very early, surprisingly early, but they are getting back to some sort of normality now. Around a quarter to a third of our clients are currently engaged in some form of restructuring. And again, that highlights that a lot of businesses either can't or simply don't want to wait until the end of the job retention scheme. We've undertaken a number of redundancy exercises already, and we'll come on to the reasons for those. The exercises to date are largely based on future expectations and not necessarily an immediate need to strip out cost. If you look at the unemployment figures and the claimant count for unemployment benefits, the furlough scheme does seem to be keeping employers from going into more serious financial difficulties. So this is a lot about future planning and strategy, and I think it's the furlough scheme has highlighted to many employers actually the time is right to look at this and maybe making changes more for the future than the immediate struggles. I'm seeing a reduced focus on administration and finance. This tends to be where most of the restructuring is coming from for me. So we're looking at merging back office functions, clerical work, merging roles in finance rather than looking at the more technical senior roles, director level and sales forces. So I think the focus at the moment is on where can we make savings by reducing headcount and merging, consolidating different positions. As I said, businesses are also looking at opportunism. So unfortunately, we do get the call that says, I want to make such and such redundant, which is obviously not how we do things. But businesses looking at the employee on long-term sick leave, the employee who was meant to retire 10 years ago, that perennial thorn in the side. I have to say, I do believe some of the processes that are being adopted are looking at opportunism. And when you're looking at fair reason for termination of employment, and the background to redundancy, I think global pandemics tend to be quite good reasons for wanting to reduce cost. That said, I am seeing a lot more challenge from employees. Sam will come on to whether that's the case for his client base, but I'm engaged in one exercise where we're stripping out a unique role, and this person has made 7 potentially viable suggestions to cut roles elsewhere, to go part-time, anything really to try and save the job. And I think if businesses are thinking that consultation is just going through the motions, really need to be thinking about putting more detailed work into the consultation processes. But the majority of the employers are holding off for the moment, and we are looking at increased costs under the furlough scheme, but many businesses are waiting until the autumn to see whether firstly one of the 2 vaccine trials works, fingers crossed. There's been some news on that this morning, or whether there's a second spike, which of course we hope there isn't. I'll move on to talk about home working. So I'm sure many attendees will be logging in from home now. lockdown did force many particular office environments to just move the whole operation to home. I know we certainly did it at Chadwick Lawrence, and it's worked very well. There are significant benefits for both parties, so reduced office costs, reduced travel expenses, the rise in availability of good video conferencing facilities. And for employees, we've got reduced travel costs, greater flexibility, and hopefully some more empowerment about how they can go about organising the working day. That said, some of my clients are now reopening the workplace, and not because they necessarily have to, but there is a question mark about supervision. There are question marks about the level of interaction face-to-face within the team, the lack of physical presence for the business. So many might be based on a high street where they need customer footfall in there. And there is an element of both isolation for employees who might be working from home and the blurring of home and work life. Not everybody will have their own office that they can work from. I've been at the dining table for 5 months or 4 months, and there is a risk that when you're working in the same environment that you're living in as well, that there can be that blurring of home and personal lives. But I do think there will be a greater shift towards flexibility, at least in the short term. When people are coming back to work, do they need to be coming into the office 5 days a week? I don't think so, and I think it has opened a lot of employers' minds where possible to the benefits of that type of setup. One thing I forgot to mention actually on the chat function, if anybody does have any questions as we're going through, please feel free to use the meeting chat. If it's very difficult, I'll hand over to Sam. If not, I will try and answer them as I go through. So we'll move on to flexible furloughing, which is taking up quite a high percentage of all of our team's advice at the moment. So the rules from the 1st of July do allow us to bring people back in a much more flexible way. That flexibility is to the extent that I was asked if somebody could perform 1 hour of work in July. The answer is technically yes. The minimum claim period is 7 days, but as long as we put some sort of flexible pattern in place that provides for even 1 hour of work, I don't see why businesses can't be claiming for that. I'm not doing the formula for you in terms of calculating that claim, but it is possible to do that. So eligible employees have to have had a successful claim in the period prior to the 30th of June. We can't claim for more employees than we have done in any previous claim in the past. I'll move on to record keeping. As I said, it's absolutely vital that we keep a record of not only the hours which have been worked, but the hours which an employee has been furloughed for, and the agreements in place that we write with employees. Ideally, they will sign up to those agreements to confirm the working pattern for the month. And that not only helps us to calculate the claim at the end of the month, but gives us that audit trail. So if HMRC do come in and say, can you tell me on what basis you made your claim in July, we can say, well, here are the timesheets, here are the spreadsheets for our employees. One issue I've faced in the last couple of weeks is when circumstances change at fairly short notice. So I do appreciate that we might agree a working pattern with somebody at the beginning of the month, and unfortunately, or fortunately, we get more work in, so we need to request an employee to do an additional day. I've had 4 or 5 circumstances where an employee has refused, and this isn't refusing to come back from furlough full stop. This is, well, you didn't give me enough notice, I'm not coming in and doing that day of work. So just a tactic to be aware of when we are agreeing any pattern. I think we should be saying to employees, this is what we envisage to be the case, but we do require a lot more flexibility from you, such that if we want you to work at any point within your contracted hours, we can direct that you do so. Otherwise, we're going to face problems where employees say, oh, I've got the day off, I didn't realise I was needed to come in. Flexibility on both sides is key there. When we come to make the claim, I don't know if anybody's actually submitted a claim under the new scheme yet, under the new portal, but we do need to work out the concept of usual hours. So it's not as simple as us logging through the portal what an employee has worked and what they haven't worked in the claim period. What we have to do is go back to either a 12-month average or the pay date prior to March, calculate an employee's normal hours or usual hours, and then measure those up against the actual hours worked in the month. We then apply that against the applicable furlough pay which is payable, so still 80% or the cap of 2,500, and there are worked examples on the gov.uk website. Where there are more than 100 that continue to be flexibly furloughed, HMRC will provide a template that can be used for a mass upload, but again that just demonstrates the need to keep these records of the hours actually worked. Claim periods have to be linked to calendar months going forwards. So if you as a business haven't made a claim for June yet, or any period prior to the 30th of June, that has to be done by the 31st of July. I understand you will lose your right to make any claim from the 1st of onwards in respect of a period prior to the 1st of July. Claim periods starting on or after the 1st of July have to begin and end in the same calendar month. That's because from August there will be a gradual tapering off of that support. The claim has to last at least a 7-day period. That doesn't mean somebody has to be furloughed entirely or working flexibly in each day of that 7-day period. We just need an agreement to cover one calendar week effectively. And HMRC have brought in the ability to delete a claim within 72 hours if it's determined that that has been made in error. Moving on to the summer 2020 economic update, we did send out a video on this last week, but the most important and surprising element for me was the job retention bonus. Further guidance to be published by the end of July, but the announcement effectively guarantees a payment of £1,000 for any worker who is brought back from furlough and who remains employed on the 31st of January next year. That will apply to anybody who is brought back and is paid at least the lower earnings limit, so $520 a month, from the scheme ending up until 31st of January, and payments will be made in February next year. I still take a very cautious view in terms of whether every single furloughed employee is going to be entitled to this, not least because there's been quite a backlash, and I know two very large fashion retailers have already said that they won't be taking the bonus up at all. I wonder when the guidance comes out whether the government will pay that bonus in respect of employees who are brought back after a certain period of time. It seems too good to be true, really, that anybody who's been furloughed, so say for example we furloughed someone for 3 weeks in April, brought them back, our operation is as busy as it ever has been, it's a bonus that's really not needed for that employee because we would have kept them anyway. In the government's plan for jobs document, they also refer to the maximum claim being less than they've published and qualifying employees. So that tells me that there's a warning sign that to qualify as an employee, it might be more than just simply having been furloughed. So we do await further news on that. You might want to hold off on bringing anybody back from furlough just for a couple of weeks, if you can, until that clarity is given. There is then the Kickstart Scheme. This is creating 6-month work placements for those on universal credit and who are most at risk of long-term unemployment. The government will effectively subsidise national minimum wage up to 25 hours a week, and employers can apply a top-up. The scheme opens in August, and the first work placements start in autumn. Again, we await further guidance on this. I think with the furlough bonus, that will be claimed through the portal in a similar way to the payments now. So I guess HMRC will marry up the payroll records with the claims already made. With the Kickstart Scheme, I expect maybe, given we're talking about long-term unemployment, DWP might be the facility to go to suggest candidates to place into work. But I hope guidance is available from July, given the scheme opens in 2 weeks' time. We've then got funded or part-funded traineeships and apprenticeships. Most importantly and attractively, £2,000 will be offered to employers for each new apprentice that they hire under the age of 25, £1,500 for each apprentice aged over 25, and that's for anyone hired from the 1st of August to the 31st of January. given the disparity in payments, I do wonder how this will work where an employer hires somebody on the basis of receiving a higher grant, because I do suspect that the older employee who's not selected could discrimination. I'm not quite sure how that will play out, but I think it is a risk that businesses are making decisions about who they hire based on age. Then it could be open to some challenge from older employees. So into the future, Summer Statement was phase 2 of the support to avoid a catastrophic rise in unemployment from the 31st of October. There will need to be a phase 3, and it's very unclear because, again, it does depend on the success of a vaccine, keeping cases down, a second spike, pressure, particularly in certain sectors. I think aviation are shouting loudest at the moment, so we wait to see what happens there. Some commentators have suggested a cut to VAT and only today a cut to national insurance contributions, the aim being to make it more affordable as possible to take people on, rather than just rewarding absolutely everybody for keeping staff on. Maybe further sector-specific measures, so we have had the VAT cut and the meal voucher scheme that kicks off in August, but it may be that for retail, hospitality and leisure, for example, there is some sort of targeted support from October. One thing that I was looking at keenly was local lockdown, not least because Kirklees seems to be on the list every day at the moment for the potential next lockdown, as well as Blackburn and Darwin. But will those areas get more targeted support if they are forced to lock down? The question was asked in Parliament on the 3rd of July, and the government would not commit to that. The test and trace system, as I'll mention in a minute, talks about SSP, but that's very little value to employees. And once the furlough scheme ends, if your workplace is shut down or you can't sell in the town because everywhere else is closed, what financial support is going to be available at local level? And I think there will probably be more pressure placed on the government to announce some measures, especially once furlough ends. I've just got a couple of bits to talk through to finish my part off. The first is on test and trace system. That currently involves people with symptoms for COVID having a test. Contact tracers will then get involved and will trace contacts of the person who is suspected of having COVID, with a view to those contacts self-isolating for 14 days. So the effect of this from an employment perspective is that it could massively expand the category of people required to self-isolate, particularly if we're talking about very local transmission and within a workplace. So for employers with a workforce that can't work from home, this is likely to increase absence levels. So employees who are required to self-isolate because of the test and trace system will get SSP. That has been announced recently. There is no plan to subsidise the full wages of employees who are required to self-isolate. And I do think that could deter employees from notifying the employer that they have been contacted by the test and trace team. As a business, you will want to minimise the risk of transmission in the workplace, and really will want to promote a culture of openness if anybody is suspected of having COVID or is being asked to self-isolate. So that might in turn make you consider relaxing contractual sick pay rules. You might offer enhanced pay if employers are open enough to say that they have been contacted by the test and trace scheme. Importantly on that front, if somebody is asked to self-isolate because they've been contacted by a tracer, they don't need a separate self-cert or medical certificate or anything from NHS 111. They should receive some correspondence from the test and trace team, and that will be sufficient evidence in order to claim SSP. And as long as you're not of a sufficient size, you can reclaim up to 14 days of SSP. Prior to receiving a test result, there isn't actually an obligation on an employer to notify an outbreak in the workplace. Tactically, I think it's probably necessary to do so. We don't want alarm bells ringing, but we do have an obligation to ensure that our workers are kept in the know and that anybody that they are in close contact with can be kept safe as well. So if there's a suspected outbreak in the workplace before a positive test is returned, I think I as the employer would be planning on making an announcement to the workforce to be extra vigilant and then putting whatever necessary measures are in place. I think Laura from Hayes will be coming on to reopening the workplace shortly. I just wanted to pick up on 3 revisions to the COVID secure guidance, which I'm sure most people will have looked at on the government website now. So on the 3rd of July, 3 additions were made. The first, employers are now actively encouraged to take steps to avoid individuals needing to unduly raise their voice. So that's not just shouty managers, but particularly in restaurants and bars, don't play loud music. I'm thinking of workplaces where, for example, you might have a factory environment with noisy machinery. Can employers come up with ways of minimising the need for colleagues to be talking loudly or talking over each other? It's just something to be aware of when you're looking at your risk assessment and how to safely reopen the workplace. Employers are advised to ensure records of staff contact details are up to date, and also that visitor details are retained. So we've looked at our office reopening, we've created a visitor log, and we've ensured that personal contact details will be placed onto that log, so that if there is an outbreak, the test and trace team can very quickly and very easily get to any contacts that are suspected of potentially having the infection. Separately, the Department of Health and Social Care have also provided guidance on keeping temporary records of staff. So particularly in terms of customers and visitors, they advise taking the name, contact phone number, date of visit, arrival time and departure time, and if there is an assigned staff member, noting who that is as well. So most commonly in a restaurant, if there's a particular waiter assigned, or in a hairdresser's, that particular hairdresser has been assigned to the customer, we need to be looking at taking those details as well. And then the final aspect of the guidance is that employers are advised to have an up-to-date COVID-19 outbreak plan. So aside from your risk assessment, your policy, any visitor rules, any employee rules, posters, etc., you are also now advised to have a COVID outbreak plan. So that's if there's more than one case in the workplace, how are we going to react to it? We should also be appointing a nominated SPOC, so a single point of contact within each office. Their role will be to advise staff en masse, and also to liaise with the local Public Health England team wherever possible. If an outbreak is declared, the employer will be asked to record all details of symptomatic staff and identify the contacts as detailed above. Just finally, and very quickly, on shielding changes, SSP will end after the 31st of July for those who are shielding and unable to return to work. The guidance states employers should help the transition for the employee back to work. And importantly, whilst there is this 1 metre plus guidance in place at the moment, the guidance does advocate a 2 metre distance for those employees who are shielding. So unfortunately, that could create a kind of 2-tier set of rules, unless you try and just apply the 2 metre rule as a precedent. So that's it from me on the whirlwind furlough and COVID employment aspects. I'm going to ask Laura if she's on Laura from Hayes, if she's on the meeting chat to, there we are, to just mute. Laura, I'm going to bring your slides up, which will be a monumental technological achievement for me. But I will hand over to you now, Laura, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine, thank you.
Okay, so the slides should be opening now.
Thank you very much. Thanks for letting me come on and just kind of discuss our case study, I suppose, around our reopening of our offices for Hayes. For those of you that don't know me, I'll just give a brief introduction. I'm one of the regional directors for Hayes Specialist Recruitment. We're a global recruitment organisation. So it's probably fairly apt that I'll discuss with you or share some of the trials and tribulations of how quickly it was to escape the offices and how damn hard it's been actually to enter back into the offices. I'll make no bones about it. It's a very different transition to when we left. So just to give you a scale of kind of the exercise that we've had to go through in the last few weeks, we've got 150 offices across the UK. So by no means could we do this all in one transition. we've been fortunate enough to be able to learn from the 23 countries that we operate in, that we're not the first to reopen our offices. So we've had the experience of learning and taking some of the good and bad points from some of the other countries that are slightly ahead of us, namely Europe and Australia and New Zealand. So where they've had some successes and changes and recommendations, we've obviously learned from that. So that's one of the positives for being a global organisation. I'm just going to talk you through the kind of black and whites of some of the agenda points that I've been through. So out of the Yorkshire and North offices, we have 15, and we're opening 2 in each fortnight, I would say, in transition. So we're hoping by kind of middle of September we'll have all of our UK offices open and accessible for our employees. It's a very, very different landscape to what it was prior to March, in that there's probably one point that I need to highlight is that our transition to reopening our offices is completely employee-led. So it is not mandatory now to work from an office. We've enabled every single one of our employees to work from home, which was a huge task because there are 3,500 employees across the UK, so everybody has the ability to work from home. But the enter back into the office is employee-led, and that's something that we've been really, really clear on, and making sure that people understand that it is up to their personal circumstances and their feelings of how safe and secure they feel about re-entering an office. Is totally up to them whether they work from home or work from an office, which has worked really well. So I'm going to take you through some of the preparations we've been through, and namely our first office opened this week, so only Monday, and that was Middlesbrough and Sheffield, so different size offices, but they've been very successful in opening, and the feedback from the staff that have gone into those offices has been very, very good this week. So I'll talk you through some of the kind of agenda points in the presentation that I've had to distribute internally. So if I talk you through our agenda, so just the next slide, please. Clicking along. If you struggle, I might be able to share it for you, Dan.
Is that okay? It should have moved on to the agenda.
Yeah, it hasn't yet. I can't see it if anyone else can. Have you got it on slideshow?
You can see the agenda.
You can?
Yeah, I can see the agenda, yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Sorry, I can't on mine, but that's no problem. So with regards to some of the things that we've had to tick off, so we've looked at target dates for reopening, so at least most of the employees internally are aware of where their office is going to reopen and when. So there's some plans for that, which has been very positive. We've looked at signage for the offices, which is very simple, bespoke signage that we've had drafted up for all of the offices and prepared as an opening pack. We've looked at cleaning and hygiene stations internally within the offices and had some really key kind of learning and like preparation messages of how to operate some of that hygiene and cleaning equipment, etc. We've looked at and completed office safety checklists, which is mandated and then had to be signed off by the UK MD prior to any offices opening. And I suppose most importantly is just temporary changes to our working policies. And this I probably will stress, which has been actually one of the most hardest things to do, because although ongoing, we're expecting our working policy to change when we feel we're at the stage where we can mandate something in a bit more of a formal basis. But in the interim, most of the policies that we're having to adapt to are very, very temporary, just because of the period of time that we're looking at, and especially most of the next 6 weeks cover school holidays, etc. So those temporary changes are quite important at the moment for us in terms of operating. The COVID escalation process, which I know Dan's just tipped on, but I'll kind of cover off what we're doing internally within Hayes and how we report daily as to where people are, which then helps that COVID escalation process if somebody does become unwell with symptoms of COVID. So if I just take you through before the next point, before slide 3, which is just to look at some of the safety posters that we've had drafted. One of the most important things, and how this has worked really well within Hayes, is that we've appointed a number of senior responsible individuals per office, and their role, and they don't have to be an office manager, they are just people who are responsible in an office to be able to mandate and go through some of the pre-training to open an office and mandate some of the policies that we want them to adhere to. But it's been fairly important that we've got a number of those individuals per office, as what we've wished or we've tried to implement is that we have at least one SRI, so senior responsible individual, on site at all times. So the SRI not only would have to be signed off as a fire warden and a first aider, but they also have to have gone through a number of rigorous webinars and adherence to the agenda points that I'm going through before they go on site and before the office opens, just so we've got somebody kind of policing some of the mandates that we're trying to implement for kind of their own well-being, for the employees' well-being. The other thing that I suppose is really important to cover off is a question I got asked today was why are you wanting to get all of your offices opening, and why are you trying to push it along in a timescale when the government haven't given us an indication that they want us all to return to the office environment when we can work from home. And I know we're not isolated in this, but I was actually talking to James Hardcastle today around some of the reasons why, because Huddersfield is in our wave too. Is we've got a number of employees who we can't take for granted have not got office setups at home. So some of those employees, didn't expect to leave the office in the space of time that we did, and they have not got studies, or they're sharing flats with people, etc. And for a lot of our employees' well-being, it's really important that we do try and get back to some sort of normality, and that they don't feel the isolation there, and we support their well-being. And that's hence why we've offered it to be an employee-led transition, because it's there for those that feel that they need it, which I think is really, really key. So I'll just take you through the next couple of slides of the safety notices, which is a little bit kind of just mundane in terms of this is what we're looking at. We've created a number of 5 posters for safety kind of instructions. So there's various. I think the most important point to make is we have offered PPE within our offices, which is not mandatory. It's not something that we've been advised to do, but we've offered the PPE for kind of a couple of main reasons. One of them is that we are in shared office spaces. So if somebody is entering a building and sharing a lift with another organisation, or if, for instance, they're walking across a town centre from the car park to the offices, that we've decided to offer PPE to our employees on that basis. Because we've offered PPE, we have to ensure that we are giving some guidance on how to use that PPE correctly, because that's a legal requirement that we have to do. So because of that, we've had to create various safety posters of how to wash your hands, how to wear your face mask, how to put gloves on and off, and how to dispose of that equipment. So because of that, we've obviously then had to have disposal systems within the office, so separate bins for the safety PPE equipment to be disposed of correctly within the office. We've then had to train the SRIs on what to do with that bin, that we don't just put it out in the normal rubbish waste, and we've got to leave it for a certain period of time before we dispose of it. And that's for every piece of PPE and sanitisation wipes that we use within the offices on a day-to-day basis. So the next posters that we've looked at, again, are preventative measures for COVID-19, which we've got A3 posters across the offices. It just shows the social distancing that we're wanting people to adhere to. What we have done with regards to social distancing is we have moved all desk spaces within the minimum of 2 metres between each desk space, and where we've got kind of empty desk spaces, we've put stickers, etc., and no entry signs, and they're not allowed to sit at the desk that is within the 2 metre distance from each other. So all of the desks are being spaced out with the help of our facilities team, and rewired and connected if we've had to move furniture around it, etc. We're on slide 5. So with regards to the other notices, we have limited all of our meeting spaces. We are at the moment not allowing any external visitors into our offices, which at the moment it actually hasn't caused any issues for us. We are using MS Teams daily for all of our client meetings. We're using MS Teams for most of our webinars, which has worked really, really well. So we haven't at the moment had the requirement to have meetings on site yet with our clients. This, I suppose, will change in the future, and I'm hoping it does, and we have a good balance. But I think with regards to kind of digitalisation, we've all become fairly competent at using different types of platforms to be able to engage with our client base. As well as our candidates who are looking for work, we've done exactly the same with that. So we're using MS Teams, we're using different scanning methods to be able to scan and look at documentation for us to be able to put people into new jobs, etc. So it's worked really well. So the wellbeing posters have all been designed with Hayes branding, Hayes logo, and they're all mandatory across the offices that are opening. And slide 6, excuse me, I've got a bit of a COVID cough, I think. Slide 6 just shows the disposal of the PPE, etc., for all of the offices. Okay. Just going on to the cleaning stations. So as well as PPE and signage, we've got various different cleaning apparatus and wipes and sprays, etc., both for our desk spaces. We have an external cleaning company coming into the offices daily to clean after the consultants have left at the end of each day. We also have cleaning products which can be used by each individual employee, and they are bespoke, and you have a cleaning set on your own desk where you clean your own desk twice a day. We also have, I would use the word communal, but they're not really communal, but they're cleaning sprays which are to be used by the SRI only. And these sprays are just antibacterial sprays, which we have obviously certain ones for kitchen use and certain ones for the general office. So it is quite straightforward in terms of the cleanliness, etc. And I think most of the feedback that I've had this week is that people do feel as if the offices are a lot more cleaner than they've ever been used to. So I think we've gone over and above some of the hygiene areas to determine that people feel as if they're entering a hygienic, clean area, which we're trying to limit any bacteria, etc., which is fairly positive. I think my slide 9, which is about the temporary change to policies, and this is the big one where I think most of our employees are fairly open to giving their feedback on. We've had to look at different policies on an interim basis. We've been fairly strict with regards to supporting employees with any issues they've got with returning to work. So we're totally aware that we cannot force people to return to an office environment where they feel vulnerable and they have issues that potentially might extend to mental health issues for not working in an office with other people. So therefore that's why we've made it very employee-led. I'm pleased to say actually most people want an ability of flexible working. Now, previous to March, we didn't really have a very flexible working policy, very good flexible working policy. We have flexible working around the working day, but we didn't operate a flexible working policy with remote working included in it for all levels of staff, just senior members of staff. But I'm pleased to say actually we've worked so well during the last 4 months and in such a mature environment externally that we are now we have to look at flexible working policy going forward. But I think part of the enhancement of digital services and the engagement of our client base has helped that we can do it in a much more practical way than previous to March. So you can see the list of contents there on the temporary changes to policy slide of things that we're looking at with regards to interim measures, which includes dress code for working from home. And this is something that actually we didn't really consider when looking and working with our clients externally on webinars, etc., that you still have to ensure that your office dress code mirrors your home working dress code where appropriate and people are actually externally facing clients, etc. But that's something that we've had to put into place fairly quickly, and that on our hot sunny days people aren't sat on a Zoom call or a MS Teams call with the flip-flops in the garden with the kids running around when they're on a client webinar. So there's just different practicalities to look at and consider when handling some of that, and there's a list of things that we've looked at. We're still not keen at the moment on letting people travel between offices. We are a sole office working policy. You have to list your base office when you want to return to office and stick to that office. We're also supporting people that use public transport, in that we're not advising people to come to the office if they're using public transport either at this moment in time, but I'm sure that will change in the coming weeks. We're asking everybody to use their own crockery, cutlery, etc. We're not allowing anyone to share any of the cutlery within the office spaces. People bring their own in. And the fridge systems are only to be used for storing milk, etc. So people have got to bring their lunch in their own kind of freezer bags. So we don't have any communal sharing facilities for any kind of food preparing or anything like that. So I think most of those practicalities have been taken fairly well from the staff. I think they do feel fairly protected within the office, and certainly this week there hasn't been any issues, and I think most people have come back and said, I'm quite pleased with the extent that the business has gone to keep us safe. So it has actually worked quite well, and some of the restrictions we've imposed on people have not been a problem so far, to the point where they're actually quite happy to come in a couple of days a week. So it's worked fairly well. My next slide, it discusses the COVID escalation process, which is very similar to what Dan was discussing. So we are operating kind of a hierarchy of notification if somebody becomes unwell. So again, the SRI responsible in the office is to flag internally if somebody becomes unwell with COVID symptoms, and we follow the NHS 111 guidelines, which is to send the employee home immediately. What we then do is we do a full clean of the desk in the office, which we would do anyway daily, and we have like an internal track and trace system where we hold an office register daily. The SRI would complete an office register, and that helps us know who has been in contact with the person who becomes unwell within the office. I'm pleased to say at the moment we haven't experienced anybody become unwell, but I'm expecting it, I suppose, as people are starting to mingle a little bit more. So fingers crossed the escalation process works for us, but we've got quite a clear guideline for the SRIs to be able to flag it upwards and how they do it too. My second to last slide is just to show you, I suppose, before opening an office, which is point 10 along that line. So the day one SRI on-site safety briefing is quite important. So we've completed these in stages. So I'll just take you through, before we've opened an office, what we've actually done. We've invited the SRIs into safety webinars. We've sent out DocuSign documents to every single employee wanting to return to an office after they've been onto a webinar with the instructions of what we've had to do to open offices. We've had the consent forms returned, and then a return to office pack sent out to each individual consultant, including all of their own PPE equipment. When we've opened an office, just before we've had the office safety checklist approved by the UKMD, and then when we have opened the office, we've conducted a kind of what I call a toolbox talk, so an on-site safety briefing, which has been conducted by the SRI, and that's before opening. And then once open, we've carried out the instructions for cleaning, the registered daily, and if anybody has any symptoms, obviously we've got that escalation process as well for anyone that becomes unwell, if that's the case. And the last slide is just to give you a little bit of an overview of some of the things that we've implemented within the office, just to keep everybody safe and well. So the seating arrangements was probably our largest kind of logistical nightmare, I suppose, because we were having to go in prior to opening and move the desk spaces around and the office equipment around. But we managed to do that in conjunction with a central IT team, where they kind of networked all the routers, etc. for us, which was helpful. But you can see there the slide just showing kind of the different things that we've had to consider. And I suppose in summary to some of that, this has been not an easy transition. Opening the office to those who wanted to return has been the easiest part, but actually the background and the work that's had to go into opening offices has been absolutely immense. I don't think that we've taken kind of any quick routes, we've taken no corners or anything like that. I think Hayes has done an amazing job of keeping their employees safe. I think that does show through as well. When people have returned to office, they can see the efforts that the business has gone to keep people safe and keep the business operating as well as possible. So I suppose we're a week in, and we're only in our first wave of opening, and next week we're in wave 2, which I think will be interesting to see how we open the whole of the UK and then the whole of the globe with our offices. But I think so far so good. I think the next stage is it's that formal change of working policies and working practices. I think that will be the big change. And although we're probably a couple of years away from that, COVID has made us leap forward and really start thinking about it sooner rather than later, which is, I think, been quite positive for a lot of the staff, but there's still a lot to do. But I think I'm hoping that was a bit of a whistle-stop case study as to what we've done internally, and I'd be more than happy to discuss on email or chat with anyone on MS Teams and anything they've done differently, or if you want any advice from things that we've covered off that you haven't, I'd be more than happy, myself or James, to discuss that and how Hayes have tackled it. But yeah, watch this space. We're I think we're 24 offices down out of 150, so I'm hoping they all run as smooth as what our region has, but I think watch this space on that. So.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Laura.
You're very welcome.
We're going to finish off on the very cheery subject of restructures and redundancies, so I will hand over to my colleague Sam Pawson on that now. Thanks, Sam.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Laura and Daniel, before. Very, very strange today. For those who don't know me, Sam Pawson, partner in the employment team. And I genuinely, over the last few years, have presented a lot of the seminars with Hayes. So this is very familiar in some ways, and then equally completely strange. So like Daniel, who is a YouTube superstar, so I'm sure you've all seen his updates and daily updates. Speaking in front of a camera is very different. For those who've been, you'll know I'm normally wandering around the room, doing questions, giving out gifts. So sat at a desk is normal for me. But we're all getting used to it. I've just put shirts on today, so we are progressing. I look back through my diary to see when I last presented with Hayes in a seminar, and looking at my diary, it was on the 21st of November 2019, and we did an event that said, plan your 2020, and you won't get to see it, but there's a lovely little flyer for plan your 2020. It's quite prophetic in a way. It says, We continue to operate in a time of uncertainty and change, so finding the right professional at the right time is key to business success. We've partnered with guest speakers, that's me, who will share how market uncertainty has affected business outlook for the year ahead. How prophetic. Well, did we know then, Hayes, that there was going to be a global pandemic? You're ahead of the time with uncertainty. So, very different today. Obviously, Daniel and Laura have shared kind of their experiences at Hayes of furlough, and obviously Daniel's talked you through the furlough scheme. I've been given the tiny little job of talking you through redundancies and restructures, and I think I was given 15 minutes to talk through the 55-year history of redundancy, the law of redundancy in the UK. So no small task then. So I thought, what would be my approach today? So rather than go through the a detailed analysis of a redundancy procedure, I'm going to take a bit of an assumption that you guys are kind of familiar with the basics. And the one benefit of everyone being on mute is you can't now shout and say, no, I've got no idea about the basics of redundancy, but tough, I've got 10 minutes. So what you're going to get is kind of my life in the last 2 months, which has been either furlough, or now is redundancy, restructure. So I thought I'd share a kind of 8 or so frequently asked questions that me and the team are getting around the subject of redundancy and restructure, because as Daniel said, the furlough scheme has completely changed how we work, and it absolutely has kept millions of people in employment. But there is a move from what we're seeing day to day now about forward planning. There is an assessment that this cannot go on forever, and obviously in October at the moment the scheme is ending. So there is a lot of kind of forward planning for October, and probably the moment linked to that forward planning with a scheme ending in October. The question I'm getting a lot at the moment is, can an employee be placed on furlough during their notice period? So the simple answer is yes, but how we got there was probably quite a journey. I'll give you a little insight into the exciting life of an employment lawyer at Chadwick Lawrence. So Daniel and I, other members of the team, quite happily advising clients the last few months that yes, of course, in the notice period, you can still make a CGRS claim and you will still be able to place an employee on furlough. On the 2nd of July, however, it was 7 o'clock in the morning. I think I'd been up since 5:30 with my 2-year-old, and my phone pings, and it's an email from Daniel, and the subject flashes up and it says, urgent revised Treasury Directive. And no email from Daniel that says the word Treasury Directive is ever a good thing. And the email from Daniel said, morning guys, no need to worry. Has anyone read the following revised Treasury Directive? It states, integral to the purpose of the CGRS is that the amounts paid to the employer pursuant to a CGRS claim are used by the employer, and I'll add emphasis, to continue the employment of employees in respect of whom the CGRS claim is made. That provokes mass panic within the employment team, who, as I say, have just been advising for 2 months, and it's time to put people on notice. So, panic, what do we do? Shall we hold, should we host a webinar? That's a good idea to tell everyone. But luckily, after some considerable pressure from ourselves and other law firms, questions were given to Parliament, and there was a written statement made in Parliament on the 8th of July, which the government have confirmed now that employers may continue to claim under the scheme for a furloughed employee who is serving their statutory notice period. So mass relief for us. I think what that directive makes clear, however, that it is for an employee who is serving their notice period. So what it's confirmed is what we've already kind of been aware, that any payment in lieu of notice or any payment of actually the statutory redundancy pay itself isn't covered. So if we are looking to cover that notice period with on the furlough scheme, so if people have lengthy notice periods, so the statutory notice period up to 12 weeks, that will only be covered if the employee remains working their notice, albeit on furlough. So it can't be paid in lieu. And again, linked to why we are seeing an uplift in redundancies and restructures now, because obviously if you're working with 12-week notice periods and you want to cover that within the CJRC, you will need to be looking sooner rather than later. So that's question one. I'm absolutely conscious of time, and I know people have been asking questions on the side. So time bearing, we'll try and answer all of those at the end, and I'll just go through kind of the quick fire ones that I've had. So question 2 that we see all the time is, can you consult with an employee whilst they are on furlough? Which obviously for a lot of companies, when they are looking at a restructure or redundancy, is going to be a common thing. Again, we haven't had a definitive answer, but the best answer we've had on this has come through from ACAS, who've published some further guidance on mainly disciplinary and grievance hearings, but I think we can assume that if it's okay for a disciplinary, it will be okay for a redundancy consultation. And that guidance confirms that furloughed employees can take part in disciplinary or grievance hearings as either the subject of the proceedings, the chairperson, an interview or witness or a companion. So that gives us some solace that will be okay. The additional advice on top of that is if we are at all concerned about the furlough scheme and consultation, as Daniel mentioned, we do have the flexible furlough option. So Daniel gave the option of one hour a month, but it goes by extension that we will be able to flexibly furlough people for their consultation process if we need. So question number 3 that I'm getting is, do I have to carry out a scoring matrix with all employees that I'm proposing to make redundant? Again, answer simple as I can, not necessarily. When carrying out a redundancy, a company does have to demonstrate a fair selection, and that will usually involve a fair application of an objective criteria to a pool of employees. And the key reference there is the pool of employees. But what case law has shown on the subject of redundancy is you can have a pool of one. So as we can probably, Daniel reference himself has been dealing with one, we can deal with unique roles and pools of one where we won't have to score that individual against colleagues. We will still have to go through a consultation process. We can't just say, sorry, you're in a unique role, therefore you're made redundant. We're still committed to that consultation process and to look for suitable alternatives, but we don't have to obviously score that individual against others. 4th, probably the most common I'm having is, do I have to offer voluntary redundancy to all employees? Answer is no. Obviously, there is a need and a requirement in business to obviously retain some members of staff. So there is a fear that if you offer it out to everyone, obviously the wrong people will select it or will ask to be made voluntary redundant. So again, we can offer it, but we can cherry pick who we offer to each employees throughout the process. Question 5: can I make a pregnant employee or an employee on maternity leave redundant? Again, common misconception that you can't, but actually we can. So we can look to make an employee on maternity leave redundant, but we do need to be conscious of risk, and we need to be conscious of a few factors. So obviously what we are looking for in a consultation process is that the employee who is on maternity leave does get preferential treatment, does get priority. So that kind of raises in two specific areas. One is when we're looking at suitable alternatives. The regulations state that obviously any employee on maternity, and when there is a suitable alternative role on offer, that employee will have priority for that role. So we need to be conscious and cautious that if there are alternative roles for employees to look at, anyone on maternity would have almost first refusal on that. Second major issue with anyone on maternity is if you are adopting a scoring criteria, you'll need to be conscious if that criteria adversely impacts that employee who is on maternity leave. So common issues there, obviously, when you have got a matrix and you're looking at things like attendance records, any absences, timekeeping, anything that potentially is linked to the employee's maternity or potentially sickness absence linked to that maternity, that we should discount that for the purpose of a scoring matrix. Question 6, can an employee refuse to attend a consultation meeting? Obviously linked to comments in Daniel's presentation about what we're seeing in practice, with obviously the concerns for COVID and people's reluctance, especially if your consultation is happening in person. So I think it's important in those cases not to jump to conclusions, see what alternatives they have. So if find out what the concern is it a concern in attending in person? Is it a technological issue of not having appropriate video or conference call facilities? And then look at all options. So if all else fails, can you undertake the process in writing, for example? So what are the options there for you? If all of those options are exhausted and the employee continues to refuse to participate, we basically are left with no option but to continue. In practice, what we're looking at there is obviously look at your paper trail, look at what you've been informing the employee, and really need to be telling them over the concern of their failure to attend. In essence, how we will have to make a decision in their absence if they do fail to attend. So again, it may happen now more than it has in the past. Conscious of the reason, ask questions of why they're not attending, and then, as I say, paper trail is critical. Number 7, I've got a few more left to fire through. Does a restructure have to be a redundancy exercise? So, as we talked about there with this seminar today, we talked about restructuring redundancies, and they aren't mutually exclusive. I rarely do quote case law. I thought there was a summary from Judge Burton on this subject that I thought is quite useful, so I'll read that out. It's in Judge speak, but I'll translate it for you. So it says, it is not an automatic consequence of there being a business reorganisation that there is a redundancy, nor is there a need for a business reorganisation in order that there should be a redundancy situation. The two are entirely self-standing concepts, but if a business reorganisation leads to a diminution in the requirement for employees carrying out relevant work, then that business reorganisation leads to a redundancy situation, and if not, not. So to translate that into English, what we're looking for in a redundancy, as simple as I can, is a reduction in headcount. So is there a reduction in headcount, or are you looking to reorganise the work without a reduction? So that's the key, but they aren't mutually exclusive. So we can go down a redundancy situation or a restructure, and they are separate, so they don't always equal each other. Final one for me that we are getting commonly is on the lovely subject of collective consultation. So, question: I operate multiple sites, and in total I'm making more than 20 employees redundant. Am I caught by the requirement of collective consultation? Again, simple answer is no, but with a more detailed explanation. So, if I was presenting live to this, it would be an opportunity for my to do my usual quizzes with a box of we used to have these leave behind. I should have one today, but we don't have one in the Leeds office. I am in today, which is we have box HR leave behind. So if anyone's been to one of my seminars, you'll have seen them. And I've given a quiz, which basically is the question on this is called the one establishment rule. Now, what I'd have asked is, what famous discount retailer was this one establishment case? Where did that come from? And the prize on the day, if anyone was shouting Woolworths, they'd have won the prize. So what came out of a Woolworths case is that if there are two separate establishments that can be distinguished, that the collective consultation wouldn't apply to a business as a whole, and they would look to apply to each one establishment. So what we're looking for in a separate establishment is the following. So the definition is to operate a separate establishment, they may consist of the following. So it's a distinct entity with a certain degree of permanence and stability, which is assigned to perform one or more tasks, which has a workforce, technical means, and a certain organisational structure which will allow it to do so. However, there is no need for it to have any of the following: a legal, economic, financial, administrative or technical autonomy, a management which can independently affect collective redundancies, and geographical separation from other units and facilities of the undertaking. So if you are working in a scenario where you do have a number of offices and you are making redundancies across a wide platform, that you need to be looking at that one establishment rule to see if they are just these distinct entities from each other. So, as I say, that was a kind of whistle-stop 15-minute presentation that would have really ideally, I've got an hour myself. I wanted just to give you a flavour of some of the questions I've been asking. I've just had a note passed that says Daniel's screen is frozen. Please, can you finish the webinar off? So, thank you to Daniel's screen for that. What we're going to do, I am conscious of time. I know some people have checked out already. We were going to do some questions, and again, I know some people have been asking questions throughout. I think the best thing to do, considering time and that we are short of another employment law expert, is that I can see the questions down the meeting chat. So what we will do is we will look at those questions, and we've got all of your details, so we will answer them on email. To echo the comments of Laura earlier, anyone who has any questions, any feedback from the seminar, let us know. Feel free to drop us emails, contact us on Teams, and we'd be delighted to answer that. So for me to finish this first of our webinars. It's been an experience, but it's something that we are going to do a lot more. So I really want to thank obviously everyone attending today for your time. Obviously, thank you for the to Laura from Hayes and Daniel for their presentations. I know there's been questions of slides. We can obviously the slides were from Hayes, so I will speak to Laura about those. But any details on the presentation, please drop us an email. And thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.